A lot of it has to do with the sense of self or that sense of control. I mean, obviously we want to do what we can. We want to try our best to help ourselves achieve our goals or, make changes we want. But we aren't in total control. And here's the thing, when we have self-compassion, so this is what's different between self-compassion and self-pity. Self-pity is very self-focused, poor me. Self-compassion is framing your experience in light of the human experience. It's difficult for everyone. Now, ironically, when we want total control, it's as if we have all the power and we're clinging desperately to the idea that if we were just the self-critic says, you should have been able to get that right, which feels safer than actually I tried my best and I came up short. So there is this desire for control, but it also comes from a very natural reason, and that's the threat defense system. So when we feel personally threatened, and of course when we fail or make a mistake or, something challenging is happening, we feel threatened, we go into fight, flight, or freeze mode. This is just instinctual. Sympathetic nervous system gets activated. But because the problem is inside of us, we fight ourselves, again, thinking that somehow that will keep us safe, we'll get control, we'll change ourselves, or sometimes just an element of, other people are going to criticize me, so if I criticize myself first, it won't hurt as badly.
Do you put off doing the things you want because of your obligations? You can often prioritise obligations over your own desires due to societal expectations and fear of failure. Surprisingly, this can actually be due to a lack of self-compassion. In this episode, we explore self-compassion in personal growth, overcoming societal barriers for men, and building resilience in the face of global challenges. Welcome to Move Your Mind, where we discuss mental health, personal development, and how to become the most successful version of yourself. Join us as we navigate hard topics, offering insights, wisdom, and inspiration to guide you toward personal success and fulfillment. I'm your host, Nick Brax, and I've been working in the mental health space for the last 15 years, helping people to find direction and gain courage to take control of their life. My mission is simple: to help you learn resilience so you can become the best version of yourself. Lacking guidance, I spent the majority of my youth feeling lost and disempowered, which led to depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, and substance abuse. Looking back, I just didn't have the vocabulary to communicate what I was experiencing, and as a man, I didn't resonate with the emotional language used in traditional therapy. I didn't need to talk about my feelings. I needed tangible solutions to guide me toward building a life I was proud of. If you can relate, then this podcast is for you. Today, KRISTIN Neff joins me to explore the importance of self-compassion, its impact on happiness and mental health, the gender differences in expressing self-compassion, and strategies for promoting self-compassion, particularly among men. Stay tuned to unlock your potential with self-compassion. KRISTIN, so nice to meet you. Thank you for making the time to have this chat.
Happy to be here, Nick.
I really appreciate it. No, it looks like you're doing super interesting work, and I'm sure our listeners will get a huge amount of value out of hearing what you have to say. So to jump into it, let our listeners learn a bit more about you, would you be able to give a bit of a background on yourself and how you came to be doing what you're now doing and what that is?
Yes. So I am an associate professor at the University of Texas at Austin. And partly how I got to be doing what I was doing is it was actually my last year of graduate school way back in 1996. And I was about to do my dissertation defense, and I had no idea whether or not I would get a job because I'd spent a lot of time, but the job market was very, very small. And I was under a lot of stress. And so I'd actually heard that mindfulness meditation was good for stress. So I took a mindfulness meditation course, and the woman leading the course talked about self-compassion, about how when you're feeling, stressed or having difficulty in your life, that you could intentionally turn inward and give yourself the same compassion, warmth, support you show to a friend. And it was a real light bulb moment for me. I had never really thought of that I could intentionally do that for myself. So I tried it out. I went home that very night, I remember, and he said, "Okay, KRISTIN, you're stressed. It's going to be okay. And, even if you have to get a job at a librarian, you'll get through this." Just kind of really trying to be, but in a supportive way, like in a friendly way to myself, instead of like, "Oh my God, what is going to happen?" And I was so impressed by the immediate strength it gave me, strength and stability. So these difficult feelings, being able to hold them in a friendly, supportive, encouraging way made me a lot more capable of dealing with things. And so then I did get the job at University of Texas finally, and then I started to research it over 20 years now. So it's been a while in the making. So now I
Wow.
research and I teach about self-compassion. I write books. Yeah.
Yeah, wow. So yeah, really, you've really dived deep into that subject, and it's a huge one. I
Yeah.
mean, speaking from my own personal experience, that's been one of the things that has probably been the biggest struggle, where you're sort of putting so much pressure on yourself and thinking so far ahead
Yeah.
and beating yourself up. And I guess it's, if you think about how we often talk to ourselves, we would never speak that way to someone we cared about, yet we're just beating ourselves up. And I know so
Yeah.
many people do the same thing. So it's such a difficult thing, but I can see how drastic the difference would be if you could
Yes.
implement these strategies into your life.
That's right. You can think of yourself as being a really good coach or a mentor or a parent or teacher. Because of course, it's not self-compassionate to let yourself slide or let yourself off the hook or not to, make changes if you need to make changes. That's actually unkind to let that slide. On the other hand, when you give yourself feedback about what needs to change, shaming yourself, beating yourself up, being harsh and cruel, it actually makes it harder to change because not only are you dealing with the issue at hand, you're also dealing with feeling inadequate or hopeless or like a
Mm.
loser. So it's a really pragmatic thing, self-compassion. It's about how can I be a good, effective supporter, friend, coach, mentor to myself that will help me achieve the results I want to achieve.
That's so interesting. So is it a common sort of trap where, because I know, again, speaking from my own experience, when
Mhm.
you're almost trying to hang on to that control and, beat yourself up about it,
Yes.
you feel like if you do that, you're more likely to get the result you want. But as you're saying, that actually blocks you from being able to make good decisions and ironically takes you
Yeah,
further away. So would a lot of
that's
it
right.
be, is that being able to sort of, let go of, like, cease control and be okay with letting go of the ego a little bit?
Yeah. So a lot of it has to do with the sense of self or that sense of control. I mean, obviously, we want to do what we can. We want to try our best to help ourselves achieve our goals or, make changes we want, but we aren't in total control. And here's the thing when we have self compassion, so this is what's different between self compassion and self pity. Self pity is very self focused, poor me. Self compassion is framing your experience in light of the human experience. It's difficult for
Mm.
everyone. Now, ironically, when we want total control, it's as if we have all the power and we're clinging desperately to the idea that if we were just the self critic says, you should have been able to get that right, which feels safer than actually I tried my best and I came up short. So there is this desire for control. But it also comes from a very natural reason, and that's the threat defense system. So when we
Mm.
feel personally threatened, and of course, when we fail or make a mistake or, something challenging is happening, we feel threatened. We go into fight, flight, or freeze mode. This is just instinctual. Sympathetic nervous system gets activated. So, but because the problem is inside of us, we fight ourselves again, thinking that somehow that will keep us safe, we'll get control, we'll change ourselves. Or sometimes there's an element of, other people are going to criticize me. So if I criticize myself first, it won't hurt as badly. Or we flee into a sense of shame and isolation, again, kind of as a safety mechanism. Or we freeze and we get stuck. We kind of play dead mentally. In other words, we just play the same tape over and over. And in our head, we think maybe the problem will go away. Now,
Mm.
when your best
Mm.
friend loses their job or makes a mistake, you aren't so personally threatened. So you don't go into fight, flight, or freeze. You go into tend and befriend mode, which is also natural for others. It's natural
Mm.
with our parents, with our friends, with our kids, with our other group members. So what we're doing is we're doing something that's a little unnatural, I must admit. We're hacking into the system that evolved to care for others, and we're using it with ourselves, even though biologically it doesn't feel as normal. So
Mm.
again, don't be hard on yourself if you're hard on yourself. Your body is actually designed for this sort of reaction because it's scared and it just wants safety. So the desire for control, it doesn't mean you're a controlling person. It just means you're scared and you want safety. But ironically, it's more effective to achieve safety if we aren't being cold and harsh and cruel and making ourselves more nervous and stressed with their own self-criticism.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's just helpful, that simple part of people just understanding that, hey, this isn't because there's something innately wrong with me. I'm
Yes.
struggling and I'm beating myself up because this is a biological thing. So now when that
Yeah.
happens, I can remind myself everyone has the same things
Everyone
come
does
up.
it.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yep.
And just remembering that it's actually more effective to be a good friend who gives you clear feedback, right? So
Mm,
many
mm.
people are afraid that a good friend, and sometimes I'll admit it, we do this with our friends. Oh, it's not a problem. Sometimes there is a problem. So we have to be honest with ourselves in the sense that we need the
Yes.
accurate feedback of what's true, what would be helpful, what wouldn't be so helpful. If we fool ourselves, that's actually not self-compassionate. So you have to be a little bit on the lookout for that. It's true. But without a doubt, think of some, I don't know, did you do sports growing up?
Yeah, that was my main thing that I wanted to be. I was a semi-professional athlete and that was my dream. So I did a lot of sport.
Right. And so, there are coaches that they can be effective, those coaches who cut you down and are so harsh. And it's not that they aren't effective, but they aren't as effective. The best coaches typically are the ones that tell you very clear feedback, but who believe in you and who encourage you and give you that
Mm.
sense of self-confidence. They're usually the most effective. So just for example, we actually taught NCAA athletes, so in the States, those are college level athletes, we taught them how to be self-compassionate toward their mistakes and training routines, or if they lost games, and to be a really good supportive coach, like the best coach they can imagine. They tried to be that for themselves, and their athletic performance actually improved.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's more
Yeah.
effective than, again, it kind of works, harsh criticism, but it causes fear of failure. It causes unnecessary anxiety. It can cause people to freeze. I'm a football fan, American football. And like when a kicker and they miss it and then they keep missing the kicks, it's just because in their head, like, I can't do it, I'm a loser. So they actually make it worse. Whereas if they just said, hey, it happens to everyone, those are the best ones. And then they just get right back up again and they make it the next time, you know.
It makes
So
so much sense. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And I guess maybe at best, if you are being so hard on yourself, it might get you results in the short term, but it doesn't seem like it could sustain. So yeah, you're going to burn out.
Exactly. In the long term, you burn out and you cause fear of failure, you cause procrastination, you can cause yourself to freeze up,
Yeah,
not think as clearly.
yeah,
You don't have as much of a growth orientation. I mean, it's a truism that failure is our best teacher, and yet somehow we don't want to believe that it's true, but it is true. I mean, that's
exactly.
the only way through is by learning from failure. And if you either don't admit failure or you just shame yourself because you feel like a failure, it's actually going to inhibit your ability to learn from it. So,
100%. Yeah, I'm a big believer in that. I mean, you learn so much more from failing, and when you
right.
look back, you realize if those failures didn't happen, you wouldn't have gone on the path that you've ended up on. So it's an essential part of your process, but
That-
it's so
That's,
hard to. We all are so afraid of rejection, and that's what I wanted to ask you as you were talking
yeah.
about that.
Hmm.
Is a big part of this self talk and beating ourselves up about us avoiding the being in a position sometimes to be rejected, because if we stay in our head and tell ourselves all of these different
Uh-huh.
stories instead of just taking action and being okay with whatever happens, it almost gives
Yeah.
us an excuse to not put ourselves out there and be exposed to whatever it is.
Yeah. So the mind is tricky, right? So we can definitely use things. It might be helpful to talk about the two sides of self-compassion, which I like to
Mm.
call the tender and the fierce. And these are
Yeah.
two ways self-compassion can express itself, and it helps, especially, for instance, if we're afraid of being rejected. So tender self-compassion is about acceptance, and it's about kind of our unconditional worthiness as human beings. When a baby's born, they don't have to go to graduate school to be worthy of compassion. All
Mm.
human beings, flaws and all, are intrinsically worthy of support and kindness. This is from this perspective, at least toward ourselves. right? I'm not talking about like serial killers or anything, but just in general, human beings by their nature, by being human, they're worthy of compassion. And what that means is when we're with ourselves, we can accept ourselves, flaws and all, as worthy. We can be there for ourselves. We can befriend ourselves. We can remind ourselves we aren't alone. And that's in terms of our self-worth. Now, our behaviors and our situations are a different thing. We can accept ourselves, without accepting our behavior. So maybe I failed. It doesn't mean that I'm a failure, but yeah, I failed and I don't want to keep failing. And there's a problem if I fail for all sorts of reasons. And that's where fierce self-compassion comes in, or you might say action-oriented compassion. And that's more about changing behaviors and situations so that they're healthy. Because if we care about ourselves, we want our behavior to be healthy and we want to be in healthy situations. And so, what that means is, we are afraid of being rejected. But with the tender self-compassion, it gives us the safety to say, even if other people don't like me that much, I like myself. And what that does, the research shows very clearly, people are more authentic. You don't have to be someone else to get other people to like you. If you like yourself, you can be authentic. You can be who you are. That's the tender self-compassion. At the same time, that people are also more willing to be motivated to like take personal responsibility, for instance, or make a change in their life if they need to. But it comes from care, not from a sense of inadequacy.
Yeah, and is that where
I'm sorry, I just put a lot on you there. I hope that made sense.
It actually, no, it makes a lot of sense, and it's so fascinating. And I'm finding I'm getting benefit just hearing this in real time, and can see so many crossovers with things, from my own personal experience. And I guess for me, another thing I've struggled with is people pleasing, and I'm getting better with it, but still struggle. But is that coming from that same thing?
Yeah, so it really, a lot of this has to do with self-worth. So in my early work, I really tried to make a contrast between self-esteem and self-compassion. So again, the self-worth of self-compassion is unconditional. All you got to be is a flawed human being. If you check that box, that you're in. Whereas self-esteem is an evaluation of worth, and it's based on criteria like, do other people like me? Am I attractive? Am I successful? Have I met my goals? And so it's kind of very contingent. And so most people, the reason they're people pleasers is because their sense of self-worth is based on, and by the way, it's totally natural. It's not just you, but based on the need for other people to approve of us for us to feel intrinsically worthy. And so we did one study, for instance, we had people listen to the meditations on my websites for 3 weeks, and we found that their sense of self-worth was less contingent on other people's approval. Because instead of looking outside, you look inside. It's like, yeah, I'm a human being doing the best I can. I'm worthy just because I care about myself. Just like, all people are intrinsically worthy. And then, so when you do that, then you don't have to impress other people to feel worthy. Now, again, it doesn't mean you stop making changes or improvements in your life, but the reason you do so is not so that you're worthy of love. You do it because you're worthy of love. So instead of being contingent, it's like, okay, I'm worthy of being happy and healthy. That's why I'm going to make that change, not because I'm only worthy if I make this change. So it really shifts the underlying intention of why we do what we do. And that's a huge shift. It's a subtle one, but it's really huge.
Hey guys, if you're enjoying this podcast, please click the subscribe button, leave a like or comment, share with your friends, and follow me on Instagram at nickbrax. I really appreciate your ongoing support. Yeah, I love that explanation. Really paints such a clear picture of being able to look at it in that way, and so many of us are in that position where society is making us feel like we need to be on that treadmill, we need to make more money, we're competing, social media is making us compare. So if you don't, I guess if you're not consciously trying to make that choice to choose yourself and to, change these behaviors, you can fall into it so easily.
It's so easy, yeah. And then there's like gender role socialization, and then there's class and culture. There's so many variables that make us feel like our worth is conditional.
Yeah.
And then once you make that shift and you're an unconditional friend to yourself, instead of being a fair weather friend like self-esteem, you're like a solid, stable friend. You have your own back. You know that even when you fail or make a mistake or, feelings of shame arise, it's like, okay, I can be here with myself. I'm not gonna abandon myself.
Mm-hmm.
Then what that does is it gives you an amazing source of strength, coping, and resilience to deal with whatever comes up. It's like being an ally as opposed to an enemy. When you go into battle, who's going to make you stronger? And actually, we've got research on this with combat soldiers. We found that combat soldiers who are self-compassionate were less likely to develop post-traumatic stress syndrome.
Wow.
Or to, consider suicide as a way to deal with their incredible trauma, or to turn to drugs or alcohol.
Yeah.
Because again, are you an ally or are you an enemy? Clearly, if you cut yourself down, you're just like kneecapping yourself. You're pulling the rug out from underneath yourself. It doesn't make you stronger. It makes you weaker.
That's fascinating. Yeah, that's really fascinating. And so if you are, very ambitious and you've got very clear goals and the goal, but then within trying to achieve those goals, you're practicing self-compassion.
Yeah.
But you're just not, the goals are so clear that you're either achieving them or not. If you're practicing self-compassion and you just never get to these things that you wanted to achieve, how do you reconcile that? Is there sort of does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, it does. We're only humans and we can achieve all our goals. So you really have to ask yourself, why am I wanting to achieve this goal? Am I wanting to achieve it because I'm not worthy unless I achieve this goal? Or am I wanting to achieve this goal because it's really important to me? Like the college athletes we work with, it wasn't okay to be second best. They had to be best. But removing the fact that sense of I'm only worthy if I'm the best. No, that's not why I want to be the best. I want to be the best because I love my sport, or, because I want to go to the pros, and then so once you shift your intention to doing it because you care, first of all, it does make you question, is this goal really important to me? Again, it's all about authenticity. Am I doing this because society says I need to do this to be, worthy? Or am I doing it because I really care? This is really important to me. And if you decide that, yes, this is really genuinely important to me, then you're going to do it because you want to, not because you have to. You're only worthy if you do. And so what you do when you get rid of all that baggage of nervousness about, am I good enough? It actually allows a lot more resources to actually focus on, okay, how can I learn? What can I do differently? What can I let go of that's not serving me?
Yeah. And then, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you're not
And
attached to
sometimes the
outcomes.
goals are not authentic. Sometimes we find, I thought that was really important, but maybe that wasn't so important. Or it changes over the course of your lifespan, and that's okay.
And if you do that, I guess what you're saying is it's going to sift out anything that's not actually for genuine reasons, and then you really can't go wrong if you're true to yourself, because the results aren't going to be the measure. It's going to sift out all the bullshit.
If you're true to yourself, and so some people say, can you have too much self-compassion? Well, it's kind of an oxymoron, because compassion, so passion is to suffer, comes with, if we're with ourselves in an unhealthy way, which means too much self-compassionate, you aren't really being self-compassionate anymore. You've fooled yourself into thinking you're being self-compassionate. But if you're being unhealthy, actually you aren't. So for instance, if you aren't seeing clearly, like, actually, maybe this behavior is a problem. Oh no, I'm just going to be self-compassionate. And the behavior is a problem. And if you don't recognize it, you're fooling yourself, which actually isn't self-compassionate.
Yeah.
So, it's something we always have to be willing to look at. So there's three components of self-compassion. There's the kindness, which I've talked about. There's a sense of common humanity, which I talked about, but there's also mindfulness. So mindfulness is the clear seeing and awareness. If we don't see clearly, like what our situation is, if we don't acknowledge our situation or acknowledge places where we need to maybe grow, or where we could work a little harder, or if we don't acknowledge places where we're hurting, then none of this is possible. So you need awareness, you need warmth, and you need connectedness, so that you don't feel so alone and isolated. Once you have those three things, then you are in business.
Yeah, that's great. No,
Yeah.
I'm loving this. This is, so I'm going to have to listen back to this every day for my own personal personal help. But no, an example I guess I've had in my own life, going from being an athlete to I've pursued a career in sort of entertainment industry and acting. And when I first
Uh-huh.
got into that, I loved it and really just enjoyed it for the creative outlet. Then when I started getting a little bit of work and auditioning, I started looking at
Yeah.
it like being an athlete, and I was trying to drill it and trying to control everything, and I started
Yeah.
hating it. So then I had to
Yeah.
go back to thinking, hang on, how do I try and do this in a way sustainably where I just really enjoy it? And the results always were better when I wasn't putting that pressure. Would that be another example of doing that in practice?
Yeah, exactly. Because you're doing it for the right reasons. You're doing it for intrinsic reasons, right?
Yeah,
Because you're just interested. So if
yeah,
one of the things self-compassion
yeah,
increases, for instance, is curiosity, because
mm,
it engenders a learning and growth orientation, because you take out of the equation, I need to do this or to ace this to be good. And you're just like, oh, this is interesting. What can I learn from this? How can I grow from this? And once you get into that learning and growth orientation, things usually flow much more smoothly. And also the sense of self. I mean, even though the word self is in self compassion, ironically, when you treat yourself like a human as opposed to me and all my inadequacies, you're actually expanding your sense of self. You're softening your sense of self. You aren't really thinking about yourself. You're just thinking about what makes me happy or what makes me healthy. And so
yeah,
anytime we reduce our self-focus, and you probably know this as an athlete, where athletes mess up is when they start overthinking things. Where when
yeah.
you're in flow, that's when you're doing your best as an athlete or an actor. So in a flow
Yes,
state, if you actually look in the brain, the default mode network, which generates a sense of self, quiets, and you're just in the moment, and you're just doing what needs to be done, and you're kind of in this place of interest and curiosity. And that's when we perform at our best. And
one hundred
self-compassion
percent.
actually allows us to do that, because it allows us to feel safe. We don't have to worry about proving ourselves. And it just engenders this, well, what makes me happy? What do I care about? What's interesting to me? Type of mindset.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, that makes so much sense. It's such an important thing. And
Mm.
I guess do the statistics show that, or the research shows that people that don't practice it are more unhappy? Because you see all of these examples of
Yeah.
businessmen, whoever it is, people
Yes.
achieving big things. I mean, Donald
Yes.
Trump would be an example. The guy is still addicted to all this stuff, but he's probably so unhappy. Like, it
Yeah.
doesn't seem to have an endpoint. It seems like an addiction. Yeah, I'm interested in the research around that.
Yeah. So it's really interesting because, again, by definition, self-compassion refers to how we're with suffering or feelings of inadequacy, or passion in the Latin means suffering. So that's
Mm,
why it's always, how are we with the tough stuff? And even though it definitely decreases things like depression, anxiety, eating disorders, PTSD, it's also really strongly linked to happiness and joy and curiosity and gratitude, optimism. And that's because if you think about it, feeling kind, so our hearts are open, feeling that sense of warmth, feeling connected to others, and then mindfulness, being present, like with what
mm,
is, these are positive mind states. So even though it's aimed at suffering, because like the loving, connected presence, which are, think about, that's kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness, we engender a state of loving, connected presence. Isn't that what we all want to be? Like
mm.
loving, connected, and present. I mean, it feels good. We feel like we're part of a whole. And so it engenders happiness at the same time that it decreases these negative mind states. That's why you can say I'm so passionate about this. It's
Yeah,
like this amazing alchemical process. You hold your suffering with love and this feeling of connectedness and awareness, and then it becomes a learning opportunity. And even what starts happening is, instead of being so focused on what's happening, actually, if I repeat myself, instead of focusing on what's happening, you start focusing on, how am I relating to what's happening? So
yeah,
it's not so much, is this painful? Is this pleasant? Is it unpleasant? It's like, am I being kind? Is my heart open? Do I feel connected to others? And then, so that gives us real freedom. We aren't so tied. Our happiness isn't so tied to what's happening moment to moment. Our happiness becomes more invested in, are we being a friend to ourselves? Is our heart open moment to moment? And that's,
yeah.
believe it or not, something we have a lot more control over. So we can't control
Yeah.
what happens, but we
Yeah.
can change our mindset and say, okay, I'm going to open my heart right now. I'm going to bring some warmth into my experience. I'm going to remember that I'm not alone and I'm part of a larger whole. I'm going to be present right now instead of lost in thoughts. We could do
Yeah.
that at any moment, and it radically changes our mood, our health. I mean, so many things it helps.
It's one thing we can control, like you're saying,
Mm-hmm.
and a big part of the work I do is in mental health advocacy, and obviously mental health is a huge issue. There's so many people suffering from
Yes.
anxiety and depression more than ever. So
Yes.
this should be very good news for everyone, because basically this is a blueprint. If you do these things you're talking about, you don't have to
Yes.
wait for permission to be happy. You don't have to wait for a result. You don't have to wait for a future event. You don't have to control anything. We've all got
Right.
permission to actually be okay now if we do these things.
Yeah. So even something as simple as saying, and maybe you've got anxiety. So my son has a lot of anxiety, just his brain is built that way.
Mm.
Even the something like, wow, it's really hard to have this anxiety, and I'm not alone. A lot of people have anxiety, and you kind of soften around that, like, oh, that's hard, and
Yeah,
I'm not
yeah,
alone. And there's so many people who struggle with this, and just being present instead of trying to fight the anxiety, just being with the anxiety, just that little shift right there means that instead of going into the negative spiral of making the anxiety worse and worse and worse, it allows you just, again, you kind of disidentify with it. You aren't the same as your anxiety. You're this
yeah,
loving, connected presence that's aware of the anxiety. And that gives you more freedom, more space. Sometimes there can even be a little like bitter sweetness, almost like, sugar on chocolate. It's not sugar coating,
yeah,
but you know what I mean? There's like almost a sweetness to it when you
yeah.
recognize that everyone has their own form of challenge. And it's not just me. This connects me to others,
Mm. That's so
especially
important.
nowadays.
Yeah,
you
and
know?
that's the thing. I think storytelling and is one of the most
Yeah.
powerful ways we can connect, and I've seen that time and time again through speaking in companies, and all of the
Mm,
work that I've done. People are suffering in silence, and we're all telling ourselves that story when we're suffering and we
yeah.
haven't spoken about it. That what's wrong with me? Why am I unique? Why am I broken? Why do I
Yes,
struggle? But as soon as you
exactly.
can hear from someone else, it's just like this relief that it's not just me, and I'm not
Yes.
abnormal, and there's actually things I can do to improve my life.
And that's self-compassion, right? In a nutshell.
Yeah, yeah, I love that.
Great.
So, is self compassion a bigger issue for men, or is it sort of fairly even across the board? Yeah, I'm interested
Well,
in
so
that.
the findings are interesting with this. And first of all, it's not a matter of biological sex or even gender identity, whether you're trans or non-binary. It's really how gender role socialization does impact the expression of self-compassion.
Mm,
So people raised as women, they're kind of told that their worth comes from caring for others, and they feel less entitled to meet their own needs. So if you just look at levels of self-compassion, people who are raised as women have slightly, it's not huge, but consistent, slightly lower levels of self-compassion. But when you look at the expressions of self-compassion, the fierce and the tender side, people raised as men are really socialized not to be tender. I mean, you
yeah,
probably know this. Boys are bullied. They're told they're too sensitive, and there's a
yeah,
reason why only 15 to 20% of the people who show up at my workshops are men,
mm,
because it's kind of emotional. Dealing with your emotions is not really a male thing, and this is a tragedy. Because again, I can tell you that self-compassion is one of the most powerful sources of coping and resilience we have available to us. And
yeah,
because of gender role socialization, a lot of men are like cut off from this incredibly powerful tool. If they would just, know that it's okay for them to be friendly toward themselves, it's not going to make them weak, then they would have that tool at their resource. Uh,
mm,
People raised as women, on the other hand, are socialized more against fierce self-compassion, right? The ability to go out there or even, get angry or to ask for what you want or to, achieve your goals, or they can be told, oh, you're too ambitious, or, there's other words for
Yeah.
for women who are too, kind of agentic or action oriented. So sadly, and the reason it's so sad is because it's like yin and yang. We need both. We need to balance the fierce and the tender. If we're too fierce without tenderness, then we can become like aggressive or just striving. We can never kind of accept what is. But if we're too accepting and not fierce enough, then we become complacent, and maybe there's some things we shouldn't accept. So it's
Yes.
like yin and yang. We need both. And unfortunately, traditional gender role socialization makes it harder. But that's why self-compassion is a radical act of authenticity, because you say, no matter what gender roles are supposed say I'm supposed to, I'm going to be, what do I need? Forget
Yeah.
society. What do I need? What's going to help me? What's true for me? And again, that will be different for every person. And that's really what self-compassion gives you the freedom to do, is to ask that question. What is right for me? What's authentic?
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And so, what can we do to encourage more men then to make that step?
Um, well, I do think the blocks for people raised as men tend to be the thing about motivation.
Yeah.
It seemed because of that kind of the culture of male socialization of being tough and just do it. I think once people know, athletic performance improved, people at work, their work performance improves when they're self-compassionate. I think
Yes.
that's one
Yeah.
way to just make that clear. And you don't have to believe me. You can go to my website. I've got there's a lot of research on this. And the fact that it makes you stronger. Again, if you look at so they're teaching this in the Veterans Administration in the United States, because people who go through very difficult things, if they aren't an ally to themselves, they are going to weaken themselves. And
Hmm.
so, again, it's a
Yeah.
gender role stereotype that compassion makes you weak, but the research shows just the opposite. It makes you strong. So I think that's another thing that can make a difference. And just this, everyone wants to be happy.
Yeah.
And so you can ask, okay, so maybe society says I'm not supposed to deal with my emotions. How's that working for you? You have the power to do something about it if you're just willing to look and be brave and just say, maybe I can relate to my difficult emotions in a different way. So,
Yeah.
but that's where
Definitely.
you come in, Nick. That's your job.
Yes, exactly. That's what I'm trying to do. That's what we've seen really. Like we're
Uh-huh.
doing. We have a platform to help with a lot of these areas, a lot of self improvement in companies, and
Uh-huh.
reframing that conversation from mental health and depression,
Yeah.
anxiety to performance. Men
Yeah.
tend to resonate a lot more. So I think that makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense because it's more that
Hmm.
tangible. Okay, I can see if I do these things, it's going to garner me this result. That makes
Right.
a bit more sense. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So.
So where can anyone listening go if they want to learn more about your research, your work, find your book, website? Where
Yeah.
can we send them?
So if you just Google self-compassion, you'll find my website, which is selfcompassion.org. And I have a lot of books. I have a lot of free practices. At the end of February, I'm not sure when this is airing, but I'm actually going to be starting a self-compassion community, an online membership where you
Oh,
can get like
amazing.
mentor sessions and just forums and kind of little workshop modules. So, my passion has always been to teach people self-compassion. So this will be another way. I'm going to try to do that through the community. But again, you don't have to do that at first. I've got a ton of free stuff on there, including research and free guided practices and exercises. So you can also take the scale I developed, the self-compassion scale, to test your own level of self-compassion. Maybe you're really high. Maybe you don't need to work on this.
Yeah.
Find out, take the test.
I love that. Yeah. Well, for
Yeah,
anyone listening, we'll put all of the links in the show notes. So definitely make
great,
sure to check it out, whether it's to join the community or do a test or whatever it is. Definitely check it out. So that'll all be
great.
there. So we finish every episode with 5 closing questions.
Okay,
So I'll jump into those. These can be just whatever answer sort of comes to mind for you. The
okay.
first one being, what's your best childhood memory that comes to mind?
The best childhood memory that comes to mind. That's a really good one. Um, for some reason, one of the earliest memories, I don't, just one of the earliest memories, I don't know if it's the best, but I used to have this calico cat whose name was Pleasure. And I loved that cat. And for some reason, I don't know why, that wasn't from here, that was from here. That image of my
Yeah,
first cat, Pleasure, came to mind. I used to cuddle with her. So maybe she's one of my earliest, best memories.
I
Yeah.
love that. Yeah, it's so
But there's
interesting
lots
what
of other
comes to
ones.
mind. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think is the biggest current burden on mental health in society?
Loneliness. Yeah,
Mm,
it's I think partly because of the pandemic, not completely, also by the change in technology, the switch to Zoom, the way we're interacting with each other is kind of less in depth, it's less personal. It does feel like people are just more and more isolated. That's also self-compassion can help that, because you might even be with other people but feel isolated in your own head.
yeah,
But that
yeah,
sense of isolation and loneliness feels like it's really just making things even worse than they were. Things were already difficult, but they seem to be getting more difficult because of that feeling of isolation and being cut off, and just less of that human interaction.
yeah. Which it's
Yeah.
this irony where we're more connected than ever through
Yes.
technology, but we feel so disconnected.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would you say is your personal definition of happiness?
So my personal definition of happiness is, again, not to be found in what's happening, but in any moment, if I can, I know for myself personally, if I can be aware and if I can be present and if my heart can be open, then I'm happy. And
Yeah,
so I really try to, am I looking for happiness in the wrong place, which is like things are going the way I want them to? Wrong place to look for it. Where is the
yeah,
place to look for it? It's in my own heart and mind.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And I guess that feeling in your gut when you are looking in the wrong places, that anxiety
Yes.
that comes up and that overwhelm
Yes.
and all these feelings, it's sort of
Yeah.
an indication that it's not you're not looking in the right place.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
What are you most afraid of?
You want the honest answer?
Yeah.
Global warming.
Yeah,
I don't
it's
think
a
I thought we'd pull it out. I don't
big
think
one.
we're going to. I think the writing is pretty clear on the wall. We aren't going to make the changes we need to in time. My son, I've got a 20-year-old son. Um, yeah, very scary. I don't know what to do with that.
It's crazy. Yeah,
Let's
it's
hope AI figures something out, or something comes to save the day. But the way things are looking right now, it's probably my, you
yeah,
know,
I exactly. It's crazy. And I was watching a documentary yesterday about showing how we've evolved, and it's crazy when you look at how how intelligent humans are and how much we've done, but then the complete ignorance as well while we're doing these things, and
the
it just
ability to
doesn't.
put the blind to not face reality is
Yeah,
enormous. Yeah,
it's just hard to get your head around
it
that
is.
we could be in that position.
Yeah.
So hopefully, yeah, AI can solve it, like you're saying.
Something. Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah.
Well, final one on a more positive note. What are you
Oh
most
yeah.
proud of?
Well, that's an easy. I am proud of the contribution I've made with self compassion. It's I feel very honored. Sometimes people come up to me and they say, "Oh, your work has changed my life," and it's
Mm,
self compassion that's changed their life. And so I'm fortunate I was in the right place at the right time. I certainly didn't come up with self compassion. This is an old tradition. I got it
mm,
from Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a Zen teacher,
mm, mm.
personally. But bringing it into the research somehow gave it a different access point for people, making it not just a spiritual thing, but like a psychological construct with empirical support. And so I'm proud that I was started that research ball rolling. There's like over 7,000 studies now. It's just insane.
Wow, that's amazing.
So
Well,
that's what I'm most proud of. Yeah.
yeah. Well, and so you should be. I think it's amazing
Yeah.
work, and yeah, thank you again for making the time to come on the podcast. I know how busy you are, so really appreciate it. And I'm sure everyone listening will get a huge amount out of this. So yeah, thank you again.
Thanks, Nick. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you, KRISTIN Neff, for joining me today and offering your insights. And thank you for listening. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the episode and any suggestions for topics you'd like to hear about. Feel free to leave a comment or send a DM. Your feedback is always appreciated. Please don't forget to click the subscribe button, leave a like or comment, share with your friends, and follow me on Instagram. It really makes a difference. Thank you so much.